Good morning. All right, so I had a fabulous Mother's Day weekend. The first Mother's Day weekend that I have enjoyed in I don't know how long. I got some really sweet, wonderful messages from people checking in on me because they knew that Mother's Day is always hard for me. Is always hard. So hard that there were Mother's Days, that's the right way to say that, Mother's Days that I would crawl in the fetal position and lock myself in the bathroom and say, not coming out today, not doing today. My kids would always ask me, what do you want for Mother's Day? Or my husband would ask me, what do you want for Mother's Day? And I'd say, nothing. I don't want to even think about the day. I would have no energy to do any activities. I just wanted to forget the day. And there's a lot behind Mother's Day for me. We all have our own stories, and if you don't like Mother's Day, your story may be similar and it may be different than mine. But for me, I have had 5 miscarriages, and my mom passed away almost 4 years ago. So before I turned 40, she passed, and she was sick for almost a decade before that. So I went through most of my motherhood without having my mother to really step me through a lot of it. So Mother's Day has always been hard for me. But it should have never been that hard. Like, not wanting to be around anybody hard. And for me, like, the grief would start setting in. Whenever you have a trauma, it can hit on the anniversary of that trauma, or usually hits on the anniversary of that trauma. Now, the thing to be aware of is that for example, here's one that just happened recently. So in April 25th is when we lost our last baby, and it was a very traumatic loss. So that date is always on my radar, so I don't get blindsided. This year, I started snapping at the children and just losing it around the 5th of April. And I was like, what is going on? Because my telltale sign when grief hits is I snap. And I'm like, what is going on? And I looked at the calendar, and it dawned on me that we found out we were losing the baby on April 5th. 3 weeks before I actually lost the baby. So, yeah. So not only do you have to be aware of the anniversaries of the actual loss, but also be aware of the anniversaries of the bad news that led to the loss. Like a cancer diagnosis of like a parent who died of cancer. You can grieve because of the loss in their passing, but also you can grieve on the day that you found out that they had cancer, because that's also a trauma. Does that make sense? So with so many traumas in my life, I'm always vigilant about what day it is, especially when a trauma can have multiple trigger dates. Okay, that's how I'm going to explain it. So that all relates into Mother's Day, because I always thought that Mother's Day was so hard for me because of the losses of my children and my mom. Well, and I can always expect like the week before Mother's Day to start being hard. And my husband left the Saturday before Mother's Day, like the week before Mother's Day, Saturday. My husband left for postseason golf. He was going to be gone for 9 days and nights, and I was going to have to navigate Mother's Day week by myself, which is not ideal for many reasons, not ideal. So he left, and by Sunday I started snapping at the kids. I'm like, oh, okay, grief is already sitting in. The dreading of this day has already set in. And I was going to get my Ignatia that helps me through the week. And I took some, and then I just started just talking to God about my heart, just like, I don't like this day coming up. You're going to have to help me through this. I'm not going to make it. Gonna have to help me through this. And that night, Sunday night, Monday morning, he gave me a dream. One of the most vivid dreams I've ever had in my life. It was a nightmare. I woke up in a hot mess. I was sweating. I was kind of in trauma mode. What I dreamt was I relived one of my real life traumas that occurred about 11 years ago. Relived it. And when I woke up, it was apparent to me that God was showing me there were multiple trigger dates for this trauma. Now, mind you, I don't talk about this trauma much. I talk about bits and pieces of the trauma. I don't talk about the core of the trauma to anybody, really. Only a few people know. And I have worked with a trauma specialist in this area years ago. But what I didn't realize is that there were multiple trigger dates for this trauma. So the trauma happened about 11 years ago, February. It started surfacing 3 months later in May, because when the trauma happened, it became a recessed memory. So when the trauma is so bad, your body protects itself by forgetting it happened. Okay. There's always like little red flags of people going, why is this occurring? Why is she doing this? Why is she acting that way? But that person may not even know why, because that memory has recessed. But there's always things that bubble up. Okay. So 3 months later, some of that trauma bubbled up, and it was compounded by another trauma that was happening in my home. All right. Because we were not in a good place at that time. Okay. That happened in May. All right. May of 2012. May of 2012. All right. So it was bubbling up and compounded even more. May of 2012. And then about 3 years later, in May, I was working with a trauma specialist, and that recessed memory came up to the surface through EMDR. And it happened fast. And thank goodness I had such a great therapist, because it could have re-traumatized me. And it kind of did, just because when you have a recessed memory that surfaces, you have to relive it, basically almost for the first time again, because it's new to you again, right? And so bits and pieces come back at you over a number of weeks and months as you try to mentally process in a safe manner what had occurred. Okay, that happened in May of probably 2015. All right. So I relived this trauma. And I woke up and I was like panicking. And realized that once I realized that it didn't happen again, it was a dream, all of a sudden a peace that surpasses all understanding washed over me. Completely washed over me. And I felt the grief lift is the best way to describe it. I didn't really necessarily feel it leave, but I felt the debilitating part of grief lift from me. Like it was no longer on me. It was no longer bearing me down. So I sat there, and God just started helping me process what he was revealing in that dream. And what he was revealing in that dream was that Mother's Day in May is not so necessarily tough because of my miscarriages and the loss of my mother. It is tough because there was an underlying trauma that I didn't recognize and respond to in the appropriate manner because I didn't realize it was there. Like, I didn't give it the proper recognition and the proper labeling. I thought the way I was feeling that day was the grief of my mom and my babies, but it was actually the grief of that trauma. And he brought that to the surface and wanted me to recognize it and label it as it is, so that I could process it and go, okay, that makes sense. Now I can give myself the proper self-care to be able to handle this day, because I was self-caring for the grief of losses, not the grief for trauma, which can be a little bit different. And I needed to properly recognize what that was to be able to properly care for myself. So once I did that, I was like, okay, I feel different. And I was like, I'm just going to wait and see. I'm not going to say anything to anybody. I'm just going to wait and see how this pans out, because I don't want to count my chickens before they hatch and think, I'm happy-go-lucky, I have no more grief, this week is going to be perfect, and Mother's Day is going to be awesome, just to have the grief return because I was wrong, right? So I was like, we'll see. We'll see. And oh my word, I had the best week. Even though Dustin was gone and I didn't have the extra helping hands, I enjoyed my children. I enjoyed them to the max. And they asked me, what do you want for Mother's Day? I'm like, okay, I think I know what I want for Mother's Day. Like, I could make those decisions. Like, I think I do want to be spoiled. Okay, I do want to be recognized. Okay, let's do this. We went to the a national park nearby. We went hiking and saw several waterfalls. We splurged on sugar. We went thrifting. Some of the kids wanted me to take them shopping so they could surprise me with a gift. And we just had several movie nights. I got a really good lesson as a mom that the movies I watched in the 80s as a kid is not appropriate for my children to watch. They are not like I remembered them to be. We had movie nights every night. I had to switch a couple movies around, but it was awesome. It was so good, and I enjoyed it, and I was not buried with grief. I missed my mom. There were times where I really missed my mom, but I wasn't buried in that grief that I couldn't get out of. And I say this because if something is stealing your joy, grief is normal. Grief is normal. But if something is stealing your joy, that is not of God. And He wants you to know what that is so you can acknowledge it and let go of it. Because I never thought I would enjoy Mother's Day. And I love this past week. So, if you are at the point that something is stealing your joy, ask God to help you reveal it. Now, I'll warn you, He might give you a really bad dream. He might give you an awful dream. And I will tell you, a lot of people say, oh, nightmares are from hell. Every scary dream that I have ever had has been an important message that God wanted me to know right then. And I was not getting that message in any other way. So He had to give it to me in a scary dream to jolt me to the point where I realized what was going on. So I just want to say that, because a lot of people dismiss dreams as something evil when it could be really something that God is wanting you to understand at that time, because it's pertinent at that moment. There's nothing in the Bible that says that nightmares come from demons, and And so I really don't like when people say that. And also, if it did came from demons or Satan, don't you think they would be riddling our nightlife with nightmares all the time? So I don't believe that for a second. And last Monday morning when he gave me that dream was just another testimony that he needed me to realize what was truly going on so I could let it go. And I want people to have that same relief if they have something that is stealing their joy. I want you to be able to really recognize it so you can let it go. So ask God to help you reveal it, because I want you to have that peace that surpasses understanding. I want you to have that authority that God has given you to take back your joy. Okay. All right, that's what I have to say. I've got to get back to mom bossing it, because that's what I do. All right, go into shalom.